Manna.
Amen. All right. So we've got quite a bit of ground to cover today in Isaiah. We're looking to go from roughly about chapter 5 and into the mid-40s. Okay, so we're going to cover a lot of chapters today and look at a lot of the themes that Isaiah is talking about and hit some of the significant moments in here. I'm going to walk through some fulfillments and set things as much as I can inside of their historical context, which is a lot of the goal of lecture for me with you guys. More than just pulling out all of the really cool or heartwarming passages, because those are one of the easy ones to talk about, but pulling out stuff that might be obscure or questionable or curious in the text. Okay, so yesterday we finished up talking about Hosea, and we were talking about Micah. Yeah. At this point, I've done like 16 hours or 17 hours of lecture this week already, and still have these 3 and 3 tomorrow. So if I'm like mixing up names and things like that, that's just give me some grace. So we talked about Micah yesterday, and then started hitting on Isaiah and getting rolling into the background and a little bit about Isaiah, and then the first few chapters of the book. And so if you remember, Isaiah chapters 1 through 5 kind of set the tone for the first 39 chapters of the book. Okay. So Isaiah is really getting kind of that message oriented in those first 5 chapters, and then the same thing will happen in chapter 40 as well, where the chapter 40 will set the tone for the rest of the book, chapters 40 through 66. So when we began looking at the book of Isaiah yesterday, we started to ask this question or consider this idea of other nations. How is God speaking about the other nations? And then how does he call Judah and Israel not to lean on or rely on the other nations? So we saw the consequences of those actions as Tiglath-Pileser III comes up, and Sennacherib and Sargon II are going to come up on campaigns against the regions and the people of Judah. So when we think about this question, why is it wrong to lean on the nations? Why is it wrong to make alliances with and for Judah to trust in the other nations? It's a question to you guys. That's how God feels about it.
You say, why is it wrong for Judah to rely on?
Yeah, why is it wrong for Judah to rely on the other nations?
Because they're not putting their trust in God, they're relying on man, essentially.
To do what for them?
Provide, just I think, protect just provide generally. Provide protection. Provide food. Provide what God was supposed to give them. Provide gods.
Yeah. So why do you guys think it's easier to trust the other nations than it is to trust Yahweh when he's been so faithful in the past?
I mean, you can see the other nations. They're physical.
Yep.
People, kings.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's evidence in front of your eyes, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Right? They can see something tangible in front of them. And it's much easier to trust in something tangible that's right in front of you than it is to trust in God, who you are not able to see, and you have to put your faith in that he will come through and be faithful to his promises. It takes a lot more trust to do that. So we're not as much in danger today of putting our trust in the nations in this room, maybe for the most part. But what do you guys think are some of the things that we are in danger of putting our trust in over God in our lives?
Money,
Our wealth or our provision. It is important to kind of make those parallels, because we could just leave this kind of in the past and Judah should have not trusted in the nations. They should trust in God, right? And say, well, I don't have to worry about trusting in the nations or not, And so we've got to make those connections, right? For us, what are the things that we're in danger of trusting in, that would supersede our trust in God or remove our trust from God, and that we wouldn't really have to worry about him that much. I'll be obedient as long as I can still be secure in my bank account. I'll be obedient as long as it doesn't really make me that uncomfortable. And as long as I still feel, relatively safe, then I'll be obedient. Okay. I think we've got to take that into consideration for ourselves, because not trusting the nations around them would have made Judah incredibly uncomfortable. It would have put them in very tight spots, and it would have been very difficult on a regular basis. But again, the prophets don't promise that it will be easy. They do promise it is the right thing to do, though. So, this is going to be a major concern for Isaiah in this portion of his book, chapters 1 through 39. This idea will come up multiple times, and so we'll see the futility in trusting the nations with Hezekiah and with Ahaz, and we'll see the judgment on the nations, chapters 13 through about 23, and we'll highlight those things and how they play into what we're looking at here. But to wrap up this introduction section, we've got this vineyard portion. Okay, so we get this song of God's vineyard, and the way that it is laid out is quite important, because this song is going to be something that will be used all throughout Israel's history. Okay, not specifically this one per se, but the whole idea that God's people are a vineyard. Okay, and this is a love song that God sings over the vineyard, right? Or that a beloved is singing over, or a man is singing over his beloved. So the agricultural metaphor, the vineyard metaphor, is going to be consistent. Jesus will tell parables of vineyards, and this is what he's thinking about. Jesus will talk about how he is the vine, and we are the branches, and he's thinking about this. Okay, so this vineyard song is very significant for the rest of the scriptures, and so I want to pay a little bit of attention to it. So, would somebody read verses 1 through 4? Chapter 5, 1 through 4.
Now I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a rich and fertile hill. He plowed the land, cleared its stones, and planted it with the best vines.
Charity, do you mind if I stop you real quick? And read it dramatically. Instead of just reading the scriptures, try to put yourself in the scriptures.
Now I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a rich and fertile hill. He plowed the land, cleared its stones, and planted it with the best vines. In the middle he built a watchtower and carved a winepress in the nearby rocks. He waited for a harvest of sweet grapes, but the grapes that grew were bitter. Now, you people of Jerusalem and Judah, you judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyard? That I have not already done? When I expected sweet grapes, why did my vineyard give me bitter grapes?
Great. So this is Isaiah's song, right? What was God supposed to do, right? It's a song about a vineyard, this one who's taken care of it, who's looked after it, who's planted it, who's tended to it. And then, when they went for the harvest, there was nothing but bitter grapes. It was not producing good fruit. And it makes me think of, I think, if I've got sound here, hopefully, then we'll see if this comes through. Let me make sure the sound is set for right.
Repentance, a turning away from sin, a hatred for the things that God hates and a love for the things that God loves, a growing in holiness and a desire not to be like Britney Spears, not to be like the world, and not to be like the great majority of American Christians, but to be like Jesus Christ. I don't know why you're clapping. I'm talking about you. I didn't come here to get amens. I didn't come here to be applauded. I'm talking about you. People so many times come up to me and they say,
That's Isaiah, right? Of course, tear down the vineyard. Of course, destroy it. That's the wise thing to do. And Isaiah says in verse 5, and now let me tell you what I'm going to do with my vineyard. And then in verse 7, he says, the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. He's like, I'm talking about you guys. I don't know why you're cheering. I don't know why you're happy about this, because I'm talking about you. And it's like Nathan coming before David. And he's like, there was this shepherd, or this rich man, and he was going to entertain his guests. And he had all of these sheep, but he saw the poor man living next to him, and he took his sheep, and he slaughtered it for his guests. What are you going to do to that man? And David's so upset at him. That man needs to pay for the wrong that he has done. And Nathan looks at him and says, you are the man. Gives a whole new meaning, calling someone the man. But that's Isaiah's word here to the people. Would this be a wake-up call to them? Hopefully. If your beloved was anything like mine, you would dump them too. It's basically what Isaiah is saying. And that's what anybody's response would be. That's what anybody's response would be. And for them to not be confronted by this reality that they are the vineyard of God and that they are living in unrighteousness and wickedness, and they deserve to be removed, right? It says here, it'll be devoured, its walls will be broken down, it'll be trampled down, it will be made into a waste. That's Israel. That's what is going to happen to Israel. And so Isaiah confronts them so incredibly with this statement that catches them. It was like a prophetic parable that Isaiah tells. And then the rest of the chapter is grouped into these 6 woes, or 6 woe oracles. And all of these are basically woe oracles in light of the vineyard. So when it says that these are wild grapes, okay? The vineyard grew wild grapes that were bitter. Okay, well, what are the wild grapes that the vineyard was growing? The 6 woes tell us what the wild grapes are. So the wild grapes in the vineyard are those who are aggressive consumers, alcoholics, liars, deceivers. They're the prideful and corrupt in the land. They're those who are using all of the people of the land for their own personal benefit. And that's who the wild grapes are in here. So those 6 woes confront the people of the vineyard quite significantly. And so God is going to remove them from the land, and he's going to replant his vineyard so that it actually yields good fruit. So with chapter 6, we get the call of Isaiah, and here's where the ministry is kind of going to transition. So chapters 1 to 5 is an introduction. Chapter 6, we get the call of Isaiah. And chapter 6, verse 1, if you want to put a date next to it, is 749 or 39 BC, something, either one. But that's the year that Uzziah died. And so this is probably when the ministry of Isaiah begins, but we at least have his call taking place here. And what does Isaiah see? Where is Isaiah in this vision? Right? In the throne room. And that throne room is where? In the temple. Good. So he is in the temple in Jerusalem. Okay. Now, he's having this picture of the heavenly throne room, but this is specifically a picture of the temple. Okay. That's why there's an altar where the coals can be taken from. The seraphim that are there would have been like the seraphim that are embroidered into the curtain that divides the Holy of Holies from the holy place. So Isaiah is experiencing and seeing a vision of himself inside of the temple of God. And what we see there is that while there might be a throne in the palace just next door, that this is where the true king lives. And that's what Isaiah is seeing. Who is the true king in Israel. And so all the things that he sees exalts God. This holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, the earth is full of his glory. The repetition of holy is a superlative that will be used throughout the Old Testament. A superlative is something where it's repeated 3 times. So holy, holy, holy. Or you get the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord in Jeremiah chapter 7. these statements of thrice repeated words or phrases are ways of the greatest level of emphasis that can be given. And this probably is what leads to Isaiah referring to Yahweh as the Holy One of Israel. Is his first encounter with God. What is the first thing he hears said about God? That he's holy, right? So because of that, it leads to his perspective that God is the Holy One of Israel. And that's how he's going to primarily refer to him as throughout this scripture, or throughout his book. And that stands in stark contrast to the unholiness of Israel. Okay, so if holiness, we have this idea of God being set apart, what then would be unholiness? That Israel is just like everybody else. So unholiness is to look like everybody else. Right? It is the opposite of being set apart like God. It's just to be the same. And that's what Isaiah is going to be called to confront in the people. What is Isaiah's response when he has this experience? What's his initial response to seeing these things and hearing these things?
I'm gonna die, like I've seen God, like I'm so sinful.
Yeah. Woe is me, a man of unclean lips, who comes from a people of unclean lips. Right? Isaiah does not separate himself as something more special than the people around him. He identifies himself with Israel in this moment. And even though he's having this privilege of being brought into this vision in the throne room, he recognizes that he is no better than Israel. Right? He recognizes his sinfulness instantly. And he recognizes that he should not be there, right? Woe is me. He's calling dread upon himself because of the reality of the situation. Isaiah recognizes the gravity of experiencing the presence of God. And I think that should provoke the people to who they are messing with when they're not listening to God and when they're being disobedient, right? Isaiah knows who the people are rebelling against. And what does he say about the Lord? The way that Isaiah refers to the Lord is to call him king. Okay? The first title that Isaiah refers to the Lord as, my eyes have seen the king, the Lord of hosts, or the Lord of armies. Right? That's Isaiah's response. And that's why then Isaiah is so concerned with the kings of Judah submitting themselves to the true king. Because they are just examples. They're just like pseudo-kings who stand in the gap for Yahweh over Judah. The kings were always meant to be just representatives of who the true king was, Yahweh, for his people. And so that's what Isaiah recognizes in his first call right here. And then as he identifies with the people, we see the call of God. So he recognizes himself as a man of unclean lips, and the angel goes and grabs tongs and gets a coal and touches his lips and purifies his lips to be able to speak the message of God. Okay? So when Isaiah hears the voice of the Lord, it says, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And Isaiah, before he even knows what he's going to say or what God's commission is going to be, he says, here I am. Send me. Now, that the willingness to go right away, regardless of what is going to be said or the ministry that's going to be given, I think is quite a significant point to consider, because Isaiah is willing. And that's what the Lord is looking for immediately, is his willingness. This is an important passage then for our call to go and preach the gospel as well, because that willingness is what God is looking for initially, right? And sometimes, we take passages out of context, like Jeremiah 29:11. God knows the plans he has for me, plans to prosper me and not to leave me forgotten. That whole passage is given to people in exile after they've been removed from their land because of the judgment of God. And that's given to them when they live in exile. And it's like, hey, you're going to live here for 70 years, and I know the plans I have for you in exile. And so sometimes we take passages out of context like that. But when we talk about saying this passage, like, here I am, send me, what we exemplify is our willingness to go no matter what the call of God will be, no matter where it will take us, no matter who it will take us to. Because Isaiah does not know yet where he's going to go or what he's going to say. And what he says is, so he gets this call, and God gives him all of this message. And what is Isaiah's response to the message? In verse 11, he says, "Then how long, O Lord?" This is not a good message. This is not a message like, "Hey guys, you're doing great. God wants to give you a thumbs up." Like, God loves you guys. Keep on keeping on. This is going to be a dramatic charge against the people. He's called in a very challenging ministry. And his response is not happy-go-lucky, "This is great, I can't wait to do it." It's, how long? How long do I have to preach this message for? Because that is not a message that I want to preach. But we will see his obedience. And that even while people will not listen to him, that he will be faithful to continue to carry the message forward. And that's the significant thing about the prophets that I think is a point we see in various places in Scripture, but specifically with the prophets, that their success is not determined by their results, but their success is determined by their obedience. And this is an important lesson in the kingdom of God, you guys, is that the world will tell us that if you don't have results, you are unsuccessful. And in the eyes of the world, that's true. If you don't have results, you are a failure. If you have nothing to show for yourself, you're a failure in the eyes of the world. But in the kingdom of heaven and before God, our success is not determined by the amount of people that listen to us or the amount of people that respond. It is determined by obeying the word of the Lord. If success in God's kingdom is determined by results, then all of the prophets were failures. Nobody listens to them. Isaiah is lucky that Hezekiah listens to him a little bit, but most of the prophets, nobody listens to these guys. And so it just paints us this idea that we have got to be aware of the fact that our success is not determined by our results, but by our obedience. And that will continue to carry us onward in what God calls us to. And for Isaiah, sadly, God says, no one's going to listen to you. Now, that's not a very comforting word from the Lord. I'm going to send you to these people, and you have to tell them all of these things, and nobody will listen. And how long? Well, until they get judged. Again, not the most comforting thing. But Isaiah will go and he will share the word of the Lord with Judah, and he will give to them the words of God, because his concern is primarily what concerns God. He cares more about what God cares about than what the people care about. And he cares more about them knowing God's heart than he does about being comforted by them and them receiving him and liking him. Chapters 7 and 8, then, after Isaiah's call, are going to progress into the time of Ahaz. So we skip Jotham as far as kings go. So Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah. We skip Jotham. There really are no chapters that are clearly during the time of Jotham in Isaiah, but he ministers during his reign. But in chapter 7, we have highlighted this war that you guys are tired of hearing of by now, I'm sure, is the Syro-Ephraimite War. King Ahaz is the king during that time, of course, and as we've heard before, Israel, Syria, Philistia are trying to partner together and get Judah to join them against the Assyrians. And that's what's happening here at the beginning of this chapter, is they're seeking for them to join this alliance. And this would be a powerful alliance, right? To join these people and to continue and to face the Assyrians together. A four-nation alliance against the Assyrians would be rather strong than four nations separate from one another trying to rebel against Assyria. And so what in this moment, they're talking about deposing Ahaz. Okay, let's go in, let's assassinate him, and we'll put a different guy on the throne, this guy, the son of Tabeel. And that, I think, probably is one of the big deals to Ahaz, is this confrontation that there is a plan that if you don't agree with us and join us, then we will kill you and put somebody in your place. And that would probably be a pretty scary situation for Ahaz, and probably why he responds the way that he responds. So what does Isaiah do? Well, Isaiah brings his son, a remnant shall return. How about that for a name? And they visit Ahaz, and they go out to this place called the Washer's Field. Okay? Now that detail is going to be important for a later story. Okay? So they go out to the Washer's Field, and Isaiah gives him this word. He says to Ahaz, "Don't be afraid, be careful and quiet, and God will fight for you. He will protect his people." And instead of receiving the word of the Lord, Ahaz will turn to Assyria and reject the prophetic word of Isaiah. And he has like this false piety, right? This false religiousness or holiness. And he kind of seems like, sure, he's going to be this great guy. And Isaiah says, "Ask for a sign." And Ahaz says, "Oh, I won't test the Lord. I'm not going to test him." Right? God says don't test him, right? And that's his false piety, right? He's trying to be holy, but really he's not, because God has invited the sign. God has invited the test. Okay? And because God has invited the test, it is not wrong for him to ask for that sign. Hezekiah will be offered the same thing. Ask for a sign. And Hezekiah says, "Okay, we'll do it. Sure. Make the clock go back 10 steps. And he does it, right? So it's not about like how dramatic it, well, Ahaz, you asked for too big of a sign. No, ask for anything. And he's like, no, I'm not going to test God. And Isaiah says, well, too bad. God's going to give you a sign anyways. But instead of being a sign of your protection, it will be a sign of your judgment. Okay. So what is the sign that he gives? It is the sign of Emmanuel, this child that will be born. Okay. Would somebody read verses 13 through 17 for us? It's a little bit of a long passage, but it's worth reading.
Then Isaiah said, "Listen well, you royal family of David. Isn't it enough to exhaust human patience? Must you exhaust the patience of my God as well? All right then, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. By the time this child is old enough to choose what is right and reject what is wrong, he will be eating yogurt and honey. For before the child is that old, the lands of the two kings you fear so much will both be deserted." Did you say 17?
Through 17.
Okay. "Then the Lord will bring things on you, your nation and your family, unlike anything since Israel broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria upon you."
Okay. So we look at the passage of Emmanuel and we think about the birth of Jesus, right? That this child, God with us, will be born from a virgin. But inside the context of this passage has to mean something to Ahaz. And it has to take place within only a few years, because it has to be pertinent to the time of the Syro-Ephraimite War. So that begs a couple of questions then. So this idea then, who is this virgin and what does it mean to Ahaz? And so the word virgin it means someone who hasn't had sex before, but in the Israelite culture, it's used as a figure of speech for a woman who is not married yet. Okay, so the statement that Isaiah makes is not that a virgin will give birth to a son, but at the time of this prophecy, that this is the virgin that will give. There is a virgin that will give birth to a son, right? So a woman who has not yet had a child. So in the context of the Hebrew, it reads more that way. Now we understand it, we read it in light of Mary, because Matthew will take this verse and apply it to Jesus. And so this is an example of what would be called a double fulfillment. Okay, so there is a fulfillment in the time of Ahaz, where a child is conceived and born and is pertinent to Ahaz's time. But it also points towards Jesus, as interpreted by Matthew, where he will say that this applies to Mary and to the birth of Jesus. And that, of course, makes a ton of sense because of the name given to this child, God with us. Okay. So this child being born comes into to be old enough to eat yogurt and honey, which would be a couple years. Okay, so children are not able to begin to eat honey until they're at least 1 to 1.5 years old. Before that time, honey can kill babies, and so you don't feed honey to a child younger than 1 year old. So the prophecy here is about a child that will grow up and that will be at least a couple years old before these prophecies are fulfilled. Simple biology. Protect your children. Don't give them honey. Okay. So the messages then over the next couple of chapters are going to be kind of in light of this. So chapter 8 will follow along with the prophecy of Emmanuel from chapter 7, where it talks about the fulfillment from Assyria coming up against the nation. And then chapter 9 will talk about this child being born, and we'll get a few restoration passages in here to highlight. So the message here will be Judah is going to be judged by Assyria. That's pretty straightforward. That is going to be Isaiah's word to them. And this is seen as an angry arm that's outstretched against Israel or against Judah. Then we'll see that Assyria will be judged by God. Okay, so the progress of the passages will move to Assyria being judged by God. And this is because of their pride. And so they are going to fall in their pride. And then God's kingdom will be the one that reigns gloriously through the Messiah. Okay? So that progression of ideas where Judah has seen themselves as exalted and chosen by God and so great, they will be humbled by Assyria. And then Assyria, who is seen as exalted and prideful and greater than Judah, will be humbled by God. And that God's kingdom will take the final place and the final authority. And that's kind of how the progression of kingdoms goes in the prophets as they talk about various times where the nations will be judged. That oftentimes it is the kingdom of God that will be the final conqueror. So Daniel will see this, Jeremiah will see this, and it will always be God's kingdom that will be the final conqueror over the kingdoms of this world. And so Judah, while they will be judged by the nations, will end up seeing the nations judged by God. So with these passages then in chapter 9, we have this amazing restoration passage in 9, 1 through 7. And that passage is meant to exemplify David as the ideal king. And for the people of Israel, they should have looked for a king like David. And as you guys know from Kings, all of the kings are compared to David in Judah. Either they did or didn't do, or follow the footsteps of their father David. But what God is looking for, of course, is that king who follows like David because of himself, right? David was a man after God's own heart, and that God is looking for someone who lives like him. But the child theme that carries through this section, all the way from chapter 7 through 12, will come up repeatedly, where multiple children will be discussed. We have this Emmanuel child, we have Isaiah's children who come up, we have this child here who is born, who will be the wonderful counselor, right? All of this, these children are talked about over and over and over. And that idea for them is not a glorious one in the fact that children are not that valuable in society. Okay? So when God is talking about what he's going to do through children, or talking about these children that are coming, right? If you talk about a king that's coming, you don't talk about the child that's going to be born and become king. You talk about the king that is going to come, right? The conqueror, the one who's going to rule, right? And so for children to be the theme in this section is a confrontation for them as well. The idea about the child, a remnant shall return, Isaiah's child, is also a confrontation to Judah over the fact that they will be incredibly judged. We talked about remnant yesterday, about how it is a very little bit of fabric. Okay? To say that a remnant shall return, or a remnant is going to be left, is not a good word. Okay? When Assyria comes up and they mock Hezekiah, right? They send out the representatives in, I think, chapter 36 and 37, and they mock Hezekiah for his disregard of the Assyrian gods, and how are you going to defend yourself? They say to Hezekiah, and we're only going to leave you a remnant left. So when God says, I will leave you a remnant, that's a statement of his judgment, not his restoration. Okay. That should not be how it is. There should be plenty of people left, plenty of people who have repented and turned back to God. Right? It is his mercy that there is still a remnant left. And the nations, as they come, will crush him. Right? Now, these words do not even shake Ahaz one bit. Right? None of these words make Ahaz move or think that he needs to repent or turn back to God whatsoever. But they will affect Hezekiah. When Isaiah speaks to Hezekiah, Hezekiah will have a soft enough heart to hear God. And it's just an important reflection that the father-son relationship here, right? That children don't have to follow in the footsteps of their parents, and God is not going to have any grandchildren, right? That every generation must choose to follow God on their own. Right? They can't bank on their parents, can't bank on their grandparents. Even though Uzziah and Jotham were good kings, doesn't mean Ahaz is going to be a good king. He has to make his own choices before the Lord. And then we see just because Ahaz was a bad king doesn't mean Hezekiah has to be a bad king. Right? We'll see the same thing with Josiah later on. You guys will see that next week. And that'll be re-highlighted from the book of Kings. But for Ahaz now, and looking at these passages, there are some significant things said between chapters 4 and chapter 11 about the branch. Okay? And the branch becomes an important messianic prophecy. And we'll see, I'll highlight here just a little bit about what we see of the branch, but I want us to read these passages, okay? So if you guys over here, you guys just in this row read chapter 4, verse 2, and then chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. And then your guys' groups, your tables, you guys can read chapter 11, 1 through 5, and 11, verse 10. Okay, and I just want you guys to write down the things that you see are said about the branch. You can write down the things that you see, at least mark them, so that you can tell me what there is about the branch. All right. How about something from, what does it say in chapter 4, verse 2 about the branch?
Beautiful and glorious.
Yeah, beautiful and glorious. Great. And then from chapter 9, somebody else in that row, what are some of the things we see about the branch in chapter 9? Well, it's not. I mean, he may not. It's the child, right? So this is a restoration passage about one who will come. So, what do we see about the one who will come?
Bring peace.
Bring peace. Great. Great. And there's a number of names that he's called as well. Okay, great. So there's some things we see in there about this figure, this kind of branch figure. And then how about you guys in chapter 10, or chapter 11, verses 1 through 5?
So much.
Okay, so what are some of those things? You can just show them out.
Come out of the stump of David's family.
Okay, great.
Bring
Bear fruit. Good.
from the old root, like the fruit that was
Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, the spirit of wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, fear of the Lord.
Great.
He will delight in obeying the Lord.
Awesome. Perfect. What else?
One judged by appearance.
Good. Yeah. Amen.
heir to David's throne, and he'll be the banner of salvation to all the world.
Amen. Great. So we see a number of things that this branch is supposed to do. A lot of the things that are talked about, this figure or this branch, have to do with rulership, right? So it is primarily about kingship and being the right king. Okay, so these type of things, these restorations, or this future prophecy of this branch figure is supposed to be confrontational to people like Ahaz or Hezekiah, right? That this is the kind of ruler that God is looking for. Right? This is his desire. This is what he will eventually bring, because none of the kings have been like this. So all that is said about the branch points towards God's ultimate desire to take care of his people, to rule them well, and that they would be able to live in a land that is peaceful and secure, and a place that fears the Lord. Right? We see that very clearly with the spirit that is upon him, and twice repeated at the end. He will fear the Lord, and his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. Right? He will honor him. He'll trust the Lord. Right? So that's what this branch figure is supposed to be. And who or where does this branch figure come from? What family? David, right? From the root of Jesse, or the stump of Jesse, right? So in the line of David. Now, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Jotham, all of them are in the line of David. All of them are from the stump of Jesse. Okay? So all that kind of figure passes on together. These kind of words are like family inheritance. Okay? It's not just some random words, like we don't have a connection because we're not from the family of Judah, but if someone came along and was like talking about what your family should be like, this is what Isaiah is saying. You should be like this. This is your family. This is your family inheritance. This is the expectancy over your family. And so that's why Isaiah is quite firm about it, and I think it's important to see for Ahaz specifically here. And ultimately, what this branch figure will do is bring the next great Exodus. And that's what God's promise here is at the end of 11, is this Exodus picture. And so the Exodus picture becomes this hope for the people. And even after they come back from exile in Babylon, there is still a hope of a next great exile, or Exodus. That they will be brought back from their spiritual exile and be brought back from the exile that they have suffered under the nations, and they will be brought through an exodus to be free as their own nation again. And that's the hope at the time of Jesus. And passages like 11:16, where it says, "There will be a highway from Assyria for the remnant that remains of his people, as there was for Israel when they came up out of Egypt." Okay, so what Isaiah is paralleling is he's saying the future restoration is the same as the first Exodus. And that first Exodus, of course, was all about freeing the people of Israel from their oppressors so that they could become a nation, so they could become the people that God desired for them. And this section, chapters 1 through 12, make one unit of scripture in Isaiah, ends with this song that Ahaz should have been singing over the Lord, or should have been singing. I don't know if it has a footnote in verse 5, but it says, "You shall say in that day." Do you see that at the beginning of 12:1? Does it say? Do you have a footnote on that by chance? 12:1.
In that day you will sing.
Okay. So yeah, in that day you will say. That "you" is singular. Okay. So that's significant when we don't get this in English, because in English we don't have a grammatically acceptable second person plural pronoun. Okay. What that means is that "y'all" is not grammatically acceptable. Okay. So while it is used quite often and quite frequently, it's just not something that we can write in the text. But authors will repeatedly move from plural to singular back and forth. Right? And if you read it in pretty much any other language, they have that. Right? Spanish has it, Korean has it, Dutch has it, Portuguese has it. Any language pretty much has a second person plural acceptable statement. So you can pick up on these things very easy. But in English, it's hard to. So what Isaiah is highlighting is that Ahaz should be the one singing this song, but because he's relied on the other nations, he will not receive the salvation of the Lord. And that is heartbreaking. Because at this time, Ahaz doesn't have to be receiving these promises of this root to come, or this branch to come, because if he was trusting the Lord and seeing God's protection over the people, then there would not need to be statements about another one to come, or someone more fearful of the Lord and more obedient to God. But what we see in these pictures is this scorching that will come. We see this scorching that will come upon the land in destruction. And it is from that place that new growth will come. And it is like new growth in a forest fire. You know, people think of forest fires as devastation on land, and it is sad to see. But forest fires are a natural occurrence all throughout nature, and as they occur, it provides room and space for new growth to take place. And forests that experience forest fires is not a new phenomenon because people leave their cigarette butts in the forest or leave their fires burning and it somehow burns down the forest. Before that time, lightning strikes would burn forests down all the time. And there was no way to put it out. And this is a way of God bringing in new growth. And it's a natural phenomenon. And what Isaiah then plays off of here is that from the root that's been destroyed, from the stump that's been cut down, right, David's family lineage that will be cut off from the throne, there will only be a stump left. And it is from that stump that a root will come, or this branch will grow out of it. Now, when Jesus calls himself the vine, and he says that those who follow him are his branches, a vine does not bear any fruit. A vine is the same thing as a tree trunk. Fruit does not grow on a tree trunk. Bark grows on a tree trunk. Branches grow out of the trunk. But the trunk cannot bear fruit. It can't even grow by itself. Okay? And that's the picture, is this vine, this root that's going to grow up, this shoot out of the stump is going to grow into the trunk. And it is from the trunk that the branches are going to come out and bear fruit. Okay? But that trunk is what gives it its life source, and that is who Jesus Christ is. And not supposed to be. He is that. Okay? And so that's what Isaiah is confronting the people with here, and Ahaz specifically, because he has abandoned the Lord. All right, so before we transition into talking about the judgment on the nations, and the passages from chapter 13 basically through 25 or so, let's take a 10-minute break.
So, back at 3:04.
Or PM for eternal life.
Yeah, PM plus. Him was. It feels like a place for eternity.
Don't worry, guys, it's coming. PM Plus is coming.
But not yay! I cannot wait.
I don't know, guys. I love it. That idea sounds awesome to me. Yeah. At least for me personally, I love like hands-on work stuff. Cleaning, mowing the lawn, like these types of things. Like I love this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know, I look forward to the day where like I don't have to teach about God anymore because we'll be in His presence, and then I could just do all the practical work all the time because I just love it so much. So
There's gotta be somebody.
It's more like relaxing, enjoyable. I love teaching. It's my favorite thing, one of my favorite things to do in life. But when I'm like doing something, man, I wish I had time to do other things like taking care of stuff. I was talking to Daniel yesterday, and I was like, I wish that I could like clone myself, because whenever I hear like calls for like, oh, can we get volunteers to help with this, or this staff position needs like some more help, I'm like, oh, I wish I could just do everything. You know, like, I just want to help everything. So. Oh man.
Actually, you can take my place tonight.
Great. Yes. Then you can take my place for lecture tomorrow.
Okay.
How kind is he to offer?
All right, so let's step back into Isaiah here. The next portions of Isaiah is going to focus on the judgment of the nations. So I'm going to put a bunch of things up here. So chapters 13 all the way through 23 is going to focus on the judgment on a variety of different nations. And so what shifts is the shift from Ahaz, and it will now shift to focusing on the nations. Okay, and the purpose of this is to show a couple of things. That God is not just concerned with Judah, but God is sovereign over all the nations. And as God is supreme over every nation, that should show Judah that they shouldn't rely on the other nations, and they should turn to God wholly and fully. Right? The next is that a lot of the judgments that come in these passages highlight human pride. That these nations think that there's something special. They're so great, and they're high and mighty, and they're never going to fall. And that's the way Judah thinks about themselves. Right? God's going to protect us. He'll look after us. Nothing bad's going to happen to us as long as we have the temple. And it is pride. It's pride in their own lives to think that they are something so special and above God. And each of these nations is confronted for basically exalting themselves above God. And Babylon is the first one. Now, when we think about Babylon being the first one, that is a little weird. Why? Because at this time, Babylon is a subjugated nation by Assyria. They are nothing. In fact, they've rebelled and been thrown down. Okay, so they're nothing special. There's nothing special about Babylon right now. You would expect the first nation to be judged would be Assyria. Right? They're the power. They're the one who is throwing down Israel, Damascus, Philistia. They're going to end up attacking Judah later on. You would expect Assyria to be the first one, but Babylon is. And as Babylon is, it is been or pictured as this rebellious city that exalts itself against God. And Babylon will take on that persona. And that persona will be that Babylon is the picturesque evil empire. And will take on that persona for all of the Bible pretty much after this time. So when you see Babylon come up, it'll talk about the physical city, but it will also talk about kind of the general picture of Babylon. So we get this taunt over Babylon, and the taunt over Babylon is about its destruction and its demise. And it's funny because it isn't anything special right now, but it will eventually be thrown down. But some people will highlight chapter 14 and bring up this question about the day star in chapter 12. What is this, or verse 12, chapter 14, verse 12. What is this day star? Well, the day star in Latin was translated as Lucifer. And that's where we get the word Lucifer from. The word Lucifer does not mean anything except the morning star, the day star, right? But we start to have used it as a name for Satan later on. Okay, but it was just a Latin word, and then it gained traction in the church a few hundred years after. The Latin translation was not made until in the 300s AD. So 300 years after Jesus, that's where it starts to gain traction. Okay, so before that time, this passage was not viewed at all in connection with Satan. Okay? But some people have connected it with that and read that into here. Okay, it does distort the context, so it misses the point of the judgment, and it imposes a lot of things upon Satan that really are not said in other places. Okay. So I do think we want to be careful not to read into the text things that are not there or make assumptions about it just because it sounds like something we want it to sound like. Okay. So just as a word of warning, just to be careful with that because it is very contextual for what it's talking about here. And it uses cosmic language about this person, which is why people will connect it with Satan and turn him into this really great, powerful figure. But the way the Bible talks about Satan is not as this great, powerful figure who should be honored or respected or anything like that. It talks about him as a defeated enemy. Right? It is not. There's no glorification. There's no exaltation. There's no reputation to say, "Oh, he was this great, awesome being," and da da da. No, that is not how the Bible talks about Satan. All glory is to God, not his enemies. His enemies are not exalted, and his enemies are not given any kind of fame in comparison with him. Okay? So, just as a word of warning for us, we want to leave Satan where he belongs, under our feet. Doesn't deserve our attention. And so this reflects then with Ezekiel 28 as well, and a lot of the same language is used for both of these kingdoms and for both of these kings. And that passage as well, people will take to look at and say, oh, it's like Satan as well. But they're really speaking out of thin air because there is nothing that says that it's Satan. The fulfillments of these passages begin to come in 539 when Persia will overthrow Babylon. And then fully in 478, the Persian king Xerxes will decimate the city of Babylon so that it is no longer an inhabited place. By the 1st century AD, or end of the 1st century into the 2nd century AD, the city of Babylon is a farming community. It is not a world superpower. So the city of Babylon, the judgment is seen over the course of many centuries. When we open up when we transition then in chapter 14, what we get with Assyria is that Assyria has a meager 3 verses against them. Okay. That should be quite shocking considering they're the most powerful nation at the time. And of all the other nations, they get the least amount of judgment against them. That, of course, will be fulfilled in 612 BC, which we'll look at with the book of Nahum tomorrow. Philistia is going to be the next one that's brought up, and they will be judged in 715. The oracle is given in 715. So verse 28, chapter 14, verse 28, you can write next to that verse if you want to, 715 BC, because that's when it takes place. That's the year that King Ahaz dies. Now, prior to this time, Philistia had been a subject of Judah. Okay. During the time of Uzziah, which he was reigning, the time of Jeroboam II, the prosperous period of the kingdom, they had subjugated Philistia. And so they were ruling over them. And then as Jotham came to power, Uzziah died, then that's when Philistia, Damascus, or Syria, and Israel joined together in that coalition. Okay. But Philistia will end up being defeated by the Assyrians. And so we see that initial attack in 720. After Samaria was destroyed, then Sargon II came down and attacked these cities. Gaza was one of them. And then again in 711, they'll be attacked by Assyria on another campaign. and then 604 when Babylon comes in. So this is like a progressive fulfillment over this nation. With Moab, this next one that pops up, is different from the others in that most of this oracle is a sympathetic one, not one of outright destruction and judgment. So it is a mourning, okay, that is taken up over the nation of Moab. Now, why might that be the case? Why is Moab given some kind of special mourning oracle, and they're shown sympathy instead of primarily judgment? Could this be because David is Moabite? Right? Moab, do you guys know the origins of Moab? Do you remember? Lot's daughter. Mm-hmm. This is ends up becoming one of Lot's sons. And so they are relatives of Abraham. And so these are Israel's kin. Even though they came from a terrible origin, an incestuous relationship, they are still given a lot of respect. Ruth is Moabite, and then thus David is Moabite also, or he has Moabite blood in him. And so that could be one of the connections. But there is judgment spoken over them, which will take place in 715 with the campaign of Sargon II. And as with all the cities, the main thing that is highlighted against them is their pride. Damascus and Syria will come next. And these ones are also including Israel with them, because on the same campaign where Damascus is judged and destroyed by Tiglath-Pileser III, they will also come up and attack Samaria. And so that could be grouped in with these together. The fulfillment for these attacks would be 734, and then for Damascus, and then for Samaria would be 722. So these would have been some of the most quickly fulfilled oracles for Isaiah, because he's speaking, and these would be happening during the time of Ahaz. Cush and Egypt are the next. Cush is where modern-day Ethiopia is. Not all of modern-day Ethiopia would have been the ancient land of Cush. Cush was really just located around the Nile River. And so that's where we're looking at here. And Egypt and Cush are commonly linked together just because they were right next to each other, and they were allies for much of history. And so they're grouped together in these oracles. And so as they're on the Nile River together, there's some specific judgments against them and some major things that are highlighted on. Now, Egypt is going to be repeatedly called out by Yahweh, right, as a reed that is not worth leaning on, because as soon as anybody leans on them, it snaps in half, and the person who has put any trust in Egypt just falls over. And what God will say about Egypt is that they are going to be the ones who will come to Yahweh. Okay, so it is a complete turn of events. Okay? Everybody was going to Egypt because really Egypt was a powerful nation. It's not like people went to Egypt for nothing. Like, oh man, I hope they're going to be good for us this time. No, Egypt is powerful. They're able to defend themselves, and they have a very strong military. So it is wisdom to go to the Egyptians. But what God is going to say is that in the way that everybody has gone to the Egyptians, so the Egyptians will come to me. Okay, so he makes that complete turnaround. And for Cush as well, that they are going to be the ones who end up paying tribute to Yahweh. Okay, so Egypt and Cush will pay tribute to Yahweh. And what that means is that they will both become vassals of Yahweh. Okay, when you pay tribute to somebody, it's not because you just like them and want to send them some money. Okay? You do it because you are a subjugated kingdom under them. Okay, so they treat Yahweh like the true king that he is and acknowledge him through their gifts. And there's a few judgments, 3 distinct parts that are confronted for Egypt and Cush. And the first one is that unity will turn into civil war in their land. The second is that the abundance of the Nile River will dry up. And the third is the wisdom of the Egyptians will turn into foolishness. Now, these things are direct confrontations of their historical context, because the nations here were incredibly unified. Egypt and Cush commonly working together. Egypt really rarely had any splits throughout their history. They were a very strong and unified nation. So to say there will be civil war was really, really a strong point, a strong judgment. The Nile River never dried up. It has been flowing well and good, very strongly for thousands of years. So to give a judgment that the Nile River will dry up like a seasonal stream would have been huge confrontation for them. This is a dramatic judgment. For them to say that their wisdom will be turned to foolishness, again, is a great one. Because the Egyptians were known in the ancient world as people of wisdom. They wrote wisdom literature just like Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes. They produced wisdom literature. And the reason we know a lot about wisdom literature and how to read it well is because we can compare it to the Egyptian wisdom literature that's written very similarly to the stuff that's in the Bible. And so, to say that the wisdom of the Egyptians will turn into foolishness. All three of these things are very dramatic statements against them. And these will end up being fulfilled in 701 by Assyria when they come up to attack Egypt, but also in the mid-600s. In 663, which we'll see in Nahum, the city of Thebes is going to be attacked by the Assyrians, a city that nobody thought would ever fall, and the Assyrians conquer it. And then finally in the 570s, Babylon will come up, and they will completely subjugate Egypt. And Babylon will be the first empire to ever completely subjugate Egypt. Chapter 20, we have the very famous passage, probably the most famous enacted symbol in the prophets. Isaiah walking around with very little clothing on, or none at all. And the reason he does this is to show the futility of leaning on Egypt. That's the whole point. He's not walking around naked because Judah is going to be taken away in exile. He's walking around naked to show this is what will happen to Egypt. Now why? Why is that a significant point for Isaiah to show to Judah? What do you guys think? Why does it matter that Isaiah walks around as a judgment over Egypt? Yeah. They were their number one source of refuge. Egypt was the number one place they went for help. All the time, they would go to Egypt. And even later on, even during the time, remember the end of 2 Kings? And Jeremiah is going to talk about this as well. At the end of Judah's kingdom, they are going to Egypt for help. And then after Judah falls, and the Babylonians conquer Jerusalem, in the time of Jeremiah, they will go to Egypt for safety. Okay, so Egypt is, for them, it is like running to the safest place. It's the castle, and you live out in the fields. You know, like, you need protection. Where are you going to go? We're going to go to Egypt. So for Isaiah to walk around naked as a judgment against Egypt is probably more of a profound word than him walking around naked as a judgment over Judah. Because Judah would just blow it off and be like, oh, no big deal. Like, it's really not, like, we'll be fine. Temple's here. They ignored all the prophets since. It's all good. But when you say your number one ally, the place where you go for strength and security and provision is going to be destroyed, that should be a huge wake-up call for them. Everything that you have thought was your safety net is gone. Right? And, you know, for us, we have safety nets in our lives. You think about our lives. Our parents are our safety net. Our friends are our safety net. We have YWAM as a safety net. If our lives, like suddenly our bank account was empty and we had nothing, and our parents died in a car accident, and we had no siblings and no family, we have a safety net with YWAM. You know, we always have somewhere to go, right? And what Isaiah is saying is that God must be your safety net. Right? Not the other nations, not your bank account. God is the one who must be your safety net. And I think that is one of the big things that Isaiah will bring up in this portion of the scriptures before chapter 39 is that question. Who is your safety net? Who do you trust in? From there, it will move to judgment on Jerusalem and Tyre and Sidon in chapter 21, and then 22, and 23. Okay. So in chapter 21, the people are confronted then for the fact that they are relying on the idols of the nations, which is who they're worshiping in their land, right? They have the altars for the idols in their land. And the people would not destroy idols when they conquered a city. Okay? So when a nation was conquered, the reason that Nebuchadnezzar will take away all the vessels of the temple is because there was no idol in the temple. Okay? Nebuchadnezzar will take the lampstand and all the cups and the tables and the incense altar, and he'll take them to Babylon. And he will take them and he'll put them inside of his temple. It is a show of dominance that their God has conquered the God. Okay? And this is an important thing to understand, is that in the ancient world, they didn't believe that they were just fighting human to human. They believed that there was a spiritual conflict, that the gods were fighting against each other every time they came to battle. And when Assyria comes along and they say, what gods have stood before us? We have conquered every god that has tried to oppose us. It's not like we conquered a city and we conquered your idols. They're saying our god Asher, the god of war, is so powerful that he will conquer any god that stands in front of him. And so they believe that the gods are fighting against each other. And so when they conquer a city, they don't outright destroy the temple. They take all of the items from the temple and they put in their own temple to say, look at how powerful our God is. And so repeatedly throughout Babylon's history, when Babylon was conquered, the invading army would come into the center temple, the temple to Marduk, and they would take the idol of Marduk, this huge statue, and they would tote him off and put him inside of the temple of another god. Okay? So the temple of Asher, like Asher is the main god worshipped there, but there's probably 20, 30, or 40 other gods inside of the temple as a sign of submission. You think of the Philistines who did the same thing in the time of David. What happened when they beat the Israelites? They took the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in the temple of Dagon. That is a symbol of their victory and their conquest. Dagon falls on his face. Right? So that's this idea here. So God is saying, I'm not afraid to break down all the idols. I will show no respect to any other god, nor should you. So when all the nations show some kind of respect to these gods, like, look who they are. Right? God's going to say they're nothing. Right? They're not even respectful, or they're not even worthy of enough respect for me to take their stuff and put in the temple. They just need to be broken down because they're actually nothing. And for a people who are so ingrained with idolatry as part of their culture, it would be a huge statement for them to realize, actually, there's nothing powerful, there's nothing worthy in any of those statues. For the judgment over Jerusalem, Isaiah calls everybody to come to the Valley of Vision. Right? He says, the oracle concerning the Valley of Vision. Now, what is the Valley of Vision? That's an interesting statement. The Valley of Vision is, as it plays out, seems to be Jerusalem. It's a cryptic term at the beginning, but as Isaiah develops his prophecy, which is quite common in a lot of his prophecies, he's going to be hidden. Remember the vineyard prophecy? He was very cryptic. And then he came in verse 7 and said, it's you, right? So he's going to do the same thing here, where he's going to talk about the Valley of Vision, and he's going to say, all these people gathered all sorts of stuff, and they were bringing water into the city, and they were using rocks to build the walls and protect themselves. And look how smart they are and how wise they are. Look at how strong their vision is. They can see in the future with good foresight. And then he'll say, and all the people in Jerusalem are blind. Okay, so it is meant to be this like confronting blow that hits you at the last second, where you're building up and you're like, yeah, those guys, really smart, Valley of Vision, they're great. And then it's full of a bunch of blind people. Right? And this was the confrontation that the Jebusites had given to David. When David was coming to take the city of Jerusalem for himself, they said, all of our blind and paralyzed people could defeat you. You'll never take this city. Right? We'll put swords in the hand of anybody who has a physical deformity, and they will defeat you. Right? And David was able to take the city. And what is being said again is the city of Jerusalem is full of blind people, just like the Jebusites, and you will be conquered as easily now as they were in the time of David. There is nothing to protect you. As much as you think you're fortified and safe, nothing will protect you. They think they're wise, but they are full of fools. And all of these show the supremacy of God, right? And that's all of these passages. I mean, we've got a bunch of references up here, but that's the point of all these passages, is that God is supreme. He is the one in control. And nobody should try to oppose him and think that they will have any kind of victory. Everybody will be defeated in facing Yahweh. Why do I have this picture of this beautiful ocean scene here? This is the city of Tyre. Okay. This is the modern city of Tyre. Remember I told you Alexander the Great built a bridge? The island of Tyre used to only be this. Alexander built this. So he built all the land out to the island and conquered it. So it's not like it was far away, but he still built a land bridge because nobody else could conquer it. I'll do it. So that's the modern city of Tyre today. Pretty cool, right? They could. Everybody tried. But the island was so easily defendable. Here they had walls. Now it's just a city, right? It's flat. You could just land on here. Before, there were walls built all around it. It was a citadel. And right here was a harbor, which you can kind of see it's been pushed out here. But the ancient city was only like this big. And so the harbor was kind of right here, and they had walls that jetted this way and guarded the harbor. So nobody could sail into the harbor and be, except those who were vulnerable to the walls, and all around the island was protection. So anybody who landed on the island would be defeated. There was really no way to do it. Yeah.
So that's modern day living.
I think so. Yes. Okay. It's fun to see, like, I don't know, I love history, and so it's fun to see, like, how people in history have affected how we understand geography today. Can't believe you did that. Okay. The little apocalypse of Isaiah. See how I did that? I got you all to look at the screen. The little apocalypse of Isaiah, here, chapters 24 through 27, will give us this kind of dualistic picture. Okay. Now, you guys haven't run into apocalyptic literature really, except for Isaiah so far, but you will run into it next week with Daniel and with Ezekiel, and then Zechariah the following week, and then, of course, Revelation the final week. Mm-hmm. So, apocalyptic literature is unique in and of itself. The word apocalypse means revealing something that was hidden. Okay? So it doesn't mean the end of the world. Okay. So when we use it that way in English, but the original word, the Greek word apocalypsis, means to reveal something that was hidden. And now if you look up apocalypse in a dictionary, you're not going to find that definition. You'll find dramatic destruction. And so when we look at this, we see a perspective of two cities. Okay, so the mini apocalypse of Isaiah, chapters 24 through 27, is really the tale of two cities. The city of the earth and the city of God. And so we see the present city of the earth is exalting itself against God. Can you think of another city that was trying to exalt itself against God in the Old Testament? Babel, right? The city of Babel. Do you guys know what city Babel will become? Babylon. Yep. Okay. So you kind of get this picture of rebellious city, evil empire, the motif that carries through all of Scripture, right? Babel in Genesis 11, Babylon conquering Jerusalem. That whole picture carries on here, where you have this other city who is a evil, rebellious city. And so the city here is presented kind of as the archetype of rebelliousness. And the way that the city is described is using references from all of the judgments of the nations. Okay? So starting all the way back in Isaiah chapter 4, but really picking up in Isaiah chapter 13, the references to this rebellious city start to come together from all of the nations, which should then make us think, okay, this is not just one city. This is world empire, kind of an amalgamation of all of that is evil and stands against God. And so the specifically here, it's connecting with this idea of Jerusalem, Babylon, Assyria, as these evil places. But then contrasting to that is this new Jerusalem, and that is the godly city. Okay. And New Jerusalem is where God is reigning as king over all of the nations and all of the earth. We see that it is a place of no more suffering and death. And it stands at the climax of this section. And Isaiah is using it to point to a city beyond his day. Okay, so this is a hopeful place of the future. And so what Isaiah is proposing for the people is, which city are you going to find refuge in? Will you find refuge in the present powers of this world, or will you find your refuge in the future protection of God's new city, Jerusalem? Do you rely upon the protection of the world and the provision of the world, or do you trust in God even when it will be tough for you here? Even when it will be difficult? Because what we will see is that God will cause the earth to stagger and fall like a drunk man. And it is not a hopeful thing to put their faith in somebody who is drunk. Unreliable. Lashing out. And so this is that ultimate picture where everything climaxes in this final kind of moment, the consummation of history kind of moment. And that question then, is it going to be the world or is it going to be the city of God? Up to you. And so Isaiah invites them into that choice. And that's the same kind of choice that Ahaz was invited into. And he chose the cities of the world. He looked at Assyria and said, I like that. Hezekiah will be invited into the same choice, and he will look to the New Jerusalem, and he will say, that's my city. And so the people of Israel are brought into the same invitation. Which city will you choose to live in? This one looks more grotesque, but it's easier to get into, and it's right in front of you. It's much more rewarding presently. This one is far away and takes effort and intentionality and is hard to get to, but it's more rewarding in the end. This is the same thing as Jesus' analogies of the narrow road and the wide path. This is the wide road that leads to destruction. It's easy to get there. Many people are going there. It looks like the right way because so many people are going that way. Right? It is the natural flow. Right? Oh, everybody's going that way. It must be the right way. No. Right? This is the narrow road. This is the road that few walk down. It is the path that takes intentionality and that has to be chosen to go against the stream. And just like salmon, when going back to their home, have got to swim against the stream and to go against all that is flowing by them. Right? Whenever salmon go back home, they are always swimming upstream, back to their home. And that is the call for God's children, is to be people who swim upstream. And in the transition then is where we close out this portion of Isaiah. Chapters 28 through 39 is going to take us through the rest of the first portion of Isaiah. And in chapters 28 through 39, we're going to see the rise and the fall of Jerusalem, or at least the prediction of those things. So we're going to see Hezekiah's trust highlighted quite a bit, and the accusation against the leaders of Judah and Jerusalem for turning to Egypt. And the thing that carries through, similar to what we saw in chapter 5 after the vineyard prophecy, will be in here that preluding this will be the kind of rhythm of 6 woe oracles that will carry this section along. And that's kind of the undertone rhythm that carries this along. To highlight the fact that the political situation here is nothing to put their faith in. They shouldn't trust in Egypt. So the confrontation against the leaders in chapter 28, which starts off this section, Judgment on Ephraim and Jerusalem, is that the leaders have blown off the word of the Lord, and they have said that it is nothing to trust in. In fact, they say this line, it's precept upon precept, line upon line. Do you guys have that? It's written that way. Would somebody read 28:10 for me out loud?
He tells us everything over and over, one line at a time, one line at a time, a little here and a little there.
Okay, great. So the way that ESV translated it is a little more just like word for word, where it will say, for it is precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little, there a little. Okay. That phrase just sounds like babble in Hebrew. It's like, oh, the prophets, they're just blah, 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 blah. Right? All their words are just like babies talking. And that's the response of the leaders. It's like, oh, why don't you just say something new? You know, all you do is say the same thing, line after line, same thing over and over and over. And that is the most offensive thing that could have been said about God's words. That people would listen to it, hear it, and say it sounds just like a baby. Now, when we hear a baby talk, it sounds cute, but it's completely unintelligible and it's absolutely meaningless. And you blow it off and totally forget about it. And that's the attitude, right? It's not the attitude of, oh, that's so cute. It's, okay, well, I'm never going to remember that, right? It's pointless. It has no meaning to me, and I will completely forget it as soon as I walk away. And that's how people are treating the prophets. So why should we keep listening? Why am I going to listen to you, right? It's baby speak to me. And we should see ourselves in a lot of these things. There's going to be another one that's a few confrontations that are quite striking, I think, as well. But what God is going to say that he will do to Jerusalem is a strange work. It's an alien work. And that word comes up a number of times as something that just means something weird or strange or out there, like it's never been heard of before. I'm not talking about Joe Rogan aliens over here. So this idea then of alien work is that God has been merciful and gracious to Jerusalem. Over and over, he's delivered them, he's protected them, he's watched over them. And so when they get judged, that's strange. That's an alien work. That's unexpected. Because God's natural inclination has been gracefulness and mercifulness to the city. And the question then is, are they measuring up against the plumb line of God? How are they following his standard? And when they are not measuring against his plumb line, then they are going to be torn down. And that is going to be a strange work for God, because it's not what he usually does. His natural bent in what we see is that he wants to be merciful to the people. So, in chapter 30, there seems to be this statement that Judah has gone to Israel for help, and the idea that Judah has gone to Israel, or that Judah has gone to Egypt already, is kind of shocking because Hezekiah has not gone to Egypt. Okay, so likely what is happening is that the leaders in Judah have gone behind Hezekiah's back, and they're going to Egypt saying, we need your help. So Hezekiah is not judged for going to Egypt. The leaders are judged for going to Egypt. And so what seems to be happening then in this scenario, and then what will go on over the next few chapters, is that the leaders are judged for their trust in the nations, of course. But Hezekiah is vindicated because he was not the one who sought them. When Ahaz came to power, he came to power because Jotham had been killed. Okay? Jotham was probably killed because he was not relying upon Assyria. And they replaced him with his son who would rely on Assyria. And so when Hezekiah comes to power after Ahaz, and he is not going to rely upon Assyria or upon Egypt, the people and the other leaders in Jerusalem look at him as a political pushover. And so they will go to the nations behind his back. Now, Hezekiah won't stand for that, and neither will Isaiah. And so they're going to call that out quite specifically. And Egypt has never been good for them. They've never been somebody to rely on. And the passage that highlights their reliance is that they're looking for the chariots to fight with them. For 31:1, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses and trust in chariots, because they are many, and the horsemen, because they're very strong. This help that they're expecting, chariots are the tanks of the ancient Near East. Right? They're the most powerful unit on the battlefield at the time. And so the people are going and relying on Egypt because they have the stronger military. They have the means to protect them, like we talked about. Right? Egypt is a strong nation. But the Assyrians are going to mock Judah, saying, oh, you think that their chariots are so strong. They're going to be nothing. They are not going to help you. And what is Egypt like? So you might go to their chariots, you might go and seek their help. And in chapter 30, verse 7, there's this funny parallel. And it says, Egypt's help is worthless and empty. Therefore, I have called her Rahab who sits still. Or chapter 31, verses 2 through 3. And yet he is wise and brings disaster. He does not call back his words, but will arise against the house of the evildoers, against the helpers of those who work iniquity. The Egyptians are man and not God, and their horses are flesh and not spirit. When the Lord stretches out his hand, the helper will stumble, and he who is helped will fall, and they will all perish together. So Egypt is completely worthless as a helper, as any kind of ally. And the picture then of this, I'm going to call Israel, right? Therefore, Egypt. Therefore, I have called her Rahab who sits still. Right? This is a picture of like, you're doing your PM, and you have someone else who's supposed to be helping you, and they just sit back on the couch on their phone. Hey, we're supposed to be doing our PM. Like, get up off the couch. They're like, just completely ignore you. Sit there. That's Egypt. Right? Egypt is the one who sits there on their phone and ignores their PM. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to do my assignments. Just going to sit here. That's the kind of picture of what Egypt is. And when Assyria is at their doorstep, it is going to be worthless help. Now, this is, again, it's easy to look at these things with hindsight perspective and say, well, of course they should have trusted in God. Of course Egypt was a worthless ally. But thinking about Assyria coming to your doorstep after having destroyed all the cities around you, you can see the smoke rising up from Lachish that has fallen after months of siege and holding out against the Assyrians. The ground is shaking under the feet of hundreds of thousands of Assyrian soldiers. Their drums in the distance, their horns, the clanging of their shields. And they come up and march around Jerusalem, setting up camp and establishing a perimeter so that nobody can leave and nobody can enter. Completely cut off. No food, no water. When you run out, that's it. And to say, don't go to anybody else for help, is a bold claim. Isaiah would have looked like a fool. But it begs the question for anybody here that with a powerful nation or a seemingly insurmountable circumstance in front of us, will we go and run to our security outside of God, or will we go to him first? Will God be the first resort in our lives, or the last one? Do we instantly go to others for help, or are we looking to God first? And Isaiah will say there's really nothing for you anywhere else except God. And you guys, it is such an important lesson to learn that God must be our place of security, because we will run to other things. There are tons of things that we can find our security in. Our phone, our friends, food, pornography, music. Whenever you have those moments, you're like, gosh, I just get so stressed out and so upset, I just need to put my AirPods in. I just need to put some music on. Right? Are we making that our security? Right? Or, man, I just want to eat a choco pie. That our response, is it just to put something inside of our body, or to feed ourselves, to put our security in something other than God? Because when we're running to those things, that are all of those things are great in and of themselves, okay? Except of course things like pornography or alcohol or whatever. But the food that God has given us is meant to be enjoyed. Music meant to be enjoyed. But when we replace God as our security and put those things in the place of God, that is where it's going. And the reason those things are such easy security for us is because those things in our lives release dopamine in our brain. And every time you eat something, it releases dopamine in your brain, and that's why it is enjoyable to eat. Sugar releases more. It is more pleasurable to eat something sweet or to eat food that you enjoy, and that releases dopamine, and it builds the trigger inside of us that is a pleasurable experience. Which is why listening to certain music does the same thing, or watching certain movies. We enjoy those things, and it releases those endorphins in our bodies that make us feel enjoyment from it. It's the natural way that God has created us. But when we allow the things in our lives to supersede our pursuit of God, or running to him for our security, that's where we have messed up. And so we've just got to be careful, I think, with those areas in our lives, and ask the question, what am I going to more than God? Is it Netflix, or Disney Plus, YouTube, music, food, that every time you have too much homework to do, you go to that stash of food under your bed, or whatever it is, that we would not put things in place of God is so, so important. And what we may not realize that stuff ahead of time. Okay? And so what must be done is to reflect. Okay? We have to take time to ask the Lord if there are those things in our lives that we're running to more than him. One of the things that so many of us go to so quickly is our phones. When we have nothing to do, or we have 5 minutes, we pull out our phone and surf it for just a little bit. Or you're bored. Where's my phone? First thing we go to is our phone. Do you know why you go to your phone? Not because there's so many things to check, but because it's addictive. The colors on the screen projecting light into your eyes releases hormones in your body that make it a pleasurable experience to look at your phone. Do you know how to remedy that? Change your phone to black and white for 2 weeks and see how much you look at it. Then you will see that your phone is naturally addictive. At the beginning of this year, I changed my phone to black and white. My screen time went down 75%. That came not just like my own personal revelation. It was a study that I had read about that this professor was doing with his students. And the student screen time on average went down between 50 and 75% because the phone was not giving them any kind of pleasure anymore because it was black and white. They still checked their emails, their messages, they sent all sorts of things, they posted videos, all that kind of stuff. But they were no longer surfing for no reason. And it brought them back into reality. Our phone right now is the most dangerous disconnect for us. It can be a fantastic connecting point for the world, but it can be one of our greatest pitfalls to fall into, where we'll just get lost. I think all of us are very much aware of that. So I challenge you guys, take your phone, put it on black and white for 2 weeks, and see how much of a difference it makes in your life. If it is something you want to spend time on anymore, or if it's something you will go to frequently. Okay. But before we take a break, I want us to pray. And I want to just take a moment to reflect and ask the Lord, is there areas of security that we're running to instead of Him? So, Lord, we thank you so much for just highlighting this area, bringing it up, God. And when we look at the kings and when we look at what they were running to, Lord, in other nations, and while we don't have those things in our lives because we're not facing the same kind of situation, God, we don't want to let anything take the place of security that you are supposed to provide for us. Lord, I pray that you would highlight to us right now any areas, Lord, that we are running to, God, that need to be replaced by you. Lord, and I pray that we would take it seriously, God. And Holy Spirit, would you speak to us? Lord, we thank you for the things that you've highlighted to us. God, I pray that we would have the boldness to take it seriously and to actually do something about what you have highlighted to us, Lord. And if that is simply just to spend more time with you, God, or come to you more often, Lord, I pray that we would do that too. Jesus, would you bless this class as they come before you, Lord, to seek you more. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's take a break. We'll start back at 4:10. Finish out our time. Don't worry, Isaiah would have told you to turn your phones on black and white also. Okay. As these chapters progress, we get this kind of interlude, a nice interlude in chapter 32 between these 6 woe oracles that talk about the coming king. And this is more hope for Judah, as this coming king is reflective of David. And up until this point in Judah's history, the first king to reflect David is Hezekiah. Okay. Other kings have been said to have walked in the ways of David or had been a good king, but Hezekiah is the first one who actually trusts in, and you see these stories of him walking in the ways of David. Right? He celebrates Passover. He reinstitutes aspects of the law, him tearing down the high place, all these types of things he is noted for. And so we do see a little bit of that coming, this king in Hezekiah a little bit, but ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, of course. And chapter 33 will then focus on this ultimate judgment that is going to come upon Jerusalem. And that destroyer will come in a variety of different ways, right? Through the nations that will come: Assyria, Babylon, Greece, Rome. And each of these is this partial fulfillment until there is this grand fulfillment in the consummation of history, where God will bring the final judgment. Now, as the chapters move towards chapter 36, where things are going to transition more into narrative, chapters 34 and 35 have these contrasting ideas. Chapter 34 is this picture of judgment on the whole land. Okay? So chapter 34 and 35 should be seen kind of like chapter 66, where you're going to have this presentation of 2 options. Which city are you going to choose? Which option are you going to choose? Similar to the 2 cities in the mini-apocalypse, you're going to choose the city of this world, you're going to choose the city of God. So chapter 34 talks about the judgment on the land. And this is similar to that judgment that came in 24 through 27. And while there has been a little bit of restoration interspersed, what we have then is chapter 35, which parallels it, where there is a huge restoration passage over the land. And as has been provoked before, the same kind of question comes up here again. Which one will you choose? So Judah, which one will you choose? From the chapter 36, we'll transition then to looking at the narrative portions where Assyria comes up against Judah and is going to confront the people of Judah. And when the people are confronted in the city, one of the biggest questions that is posed against Judah and by the Assyrians is this question: is Yahweh actually big enough? Is he powerful enough? Are the other gods of the other nations more powerful? The Assyrian army is going to suggest so, because they are going to say that Assyria has defeated all the gods of the other nations. None of their gods were able to protect them, and so what makes you think that your God is so special that he'll protect you now? And the kind of chiastic structure, or the theological center, and even the structural center of this book really is these chapters. Okay? These chapters are the center of this book, structurally. And what is the message of these chapters? Trust in God. Trust in God. This is the unifying theme throughout the first part and the second part of this book, is to trust in Yahweh. This term will show up 15 times in Isaiah. Okay, so it is a very common theme. But of those 15 times, 9 times will be in these chapters alone, chapters 36 to 39. Okay. So over half the amount of time appears right here in the center of the book, and shows you this is the theme of this book. Right? This is what Isaiah is calling for. And the interesting thing is that pretty much all of the times that this theme comes up, it's on the mouth of the Assyrians. Will you trust in Yahweh? Is your God so great? Is he worthy of your trust? Each time. I want to read some of this. Would someone read 36:4 and 36:5 for us?
Then the Assyrian king's chief of staff told them to give this message to Hezekiah. This is what the great king of Assyria says. What are you trusting in that makes you so proud? Do you think that mere words can substitute for military skill and strength? Who are you counting on when you have rebelled against me?
That word counting on is the word trust in Hebrew. And you want to read verse 6 also?
On Egypt? If you leave off Egypt, it will be like a reed that splinters beneath your weight and pierces your hand. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is completely on your line.
Trusting in Egypt, trusting in him, again, of Egypt. And then verse 7 as well. You can read verse 7. Sorry.
But perhaps you will say to me, we are trusting in the Lord our God. But isn't he the one who was insulted by Hezekiah? Didn't Hezekiah tear down the shrines and altars and make everyone in Judah and Jerusalem worship only at the altar here in Jerusalem?
Why don't you finish out the passage? It's so good. It's just so good. There's so many good themes in here I want to highlight. So finish out the passage.
I'll tell you what, strike a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you can find that many men to ride on them. With your tiny army, how can you think of challenging even the weakest contingent of my master's troops, even with the help of Egypt's chariots and charioteers? What's more, do you think we have invaded your land without the least direction? The Lord himself told us, attack this land and destroy it.
Okay. So the last one in verse 9, where I forget what it says, something about Egypt in there, that also is the word trust in Hebrew. Okay. So all of these passages, And again, in verse 15, later on, it will say, "Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying, 'The Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hands of the king of Assyria.'" No. Each one of these references to trust is on the lips of the Assyrians. Isaiah is not the one saying it. He's not the one inside the city saying, "Trust in Yahweh." It's all the Assyrians who are mocking them. Are you going to do it? Are you going to trust in Yahweh? Do you really think that's going to deliver you? Is that going to protect you? Hezekiah tore down all the altars. He tore down all of the places of worship and said, "Only worship at the temple." Don't you think all those gods are angry? Even the Lord himself told us to come up and attack you. And so the big competition is, who will you trust? Will you trust Egypt or will you trust God? And Assyria's confrontation is both of them are worthless. Right? But Isaiah's, his push all along has been, trust God, not Egypt. And so when Assyria presents these options, this is a confirmation of Isaiah's message. Yes, Egypt will not be trustworthy. The Assyrians are affirming it. And so who are you going to trust? Who will you trust? See, it's in 37:10 as well. "Do not let the Lord your God, in whom you trust, deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given in the hand of the king of Assyria." Okay, that's also from the Assyrians. That's the last instance of trust. So those 9 instances, each one from the Assyrians, should ask this question: will Hezekiah trust in Egypt or will he trust in God? Now, we see what Hezekiah chooses, which is great. Hezekiah chooses to trust in the Lord. So I'll read out the rest of that passage, 37:10 through 13. So I just read verse 10, and then verse 11. "Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, devoting them to destruction. And shall you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them, the nations that my fathers destroyed? Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the people of Eden, who were in Telassar? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of the city of Sepharvaim, the king of Hanan, or the king of Ivah? Where are the people who are powerful? Where are their gods? They did nothing for them." This is the same kind of conversation from 36:20, where it says the exact same thing. Their gods were not able to help them. Where are the gods of Hanath, Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they delivered them? Right? Where are the gods of these lands? You know it's bad when even your enemies question the futility of the gods. Right? If Isaiah has been coming along and he has been saying, "Don't trust in idols, all of this is futile," and then your enemies come along and they say, "Yeah, don't trust in the gods, they're futile. They're not going to protect you." Okay? It is a confirmation of Isaiah's message. But what do you expect? If you're in this position, nobody has stood in the way of these guys. Right? To use a modern example, this would be like the American military coming to Liechtenstein. Just a few hours away, tiny kingdom, and the kingdom of Liechtenstein rebels against the United States of America. The whole American military rolls up on Liechtenstein. Who's going to protect you, Liechtenstein? Where are you going to go? No one's protected you yet. America's stomped everybody else. Right? It's this picture of the biggest superpower to ever exist against this weak little kingdom that is literally only one city. Will you still trust in God when there is zero hope anywhere else? Again, will he be the first recourse or the last resort? And it's no wonder that Hezekiah receives this and he goes and he cries in the house of the Lord. Right? He runs the temple of God and he says, God, you've got to help us. Right? He prays so dramatically to the Lord, save us, protect us. Right? So what we see from Hezekiah is the response of what should have been all along from Ahaz initially, is this trust in God, and now we see it in Hezekiah. So when it comes to crunch time, what will be the response? The record of Sennacherib's attack shows up in what is called Sennacherib's prism. This is just a rendering of it, of course. And it is a stone block that has a number of records of warfare recorded on it, but this one particularly, right here, records the attack upon Jerusalem and records where it says that Hezekiah was hemmed up like a bird in a cage, and that nothing was able to stand in his way all throughout Judah. Okay. And when push came to shove in this moment, we see Hezekiah's response to God. Now, when we reflect upon this whole event, the event between Ahaz and Hezekiah are being paralleled with one another. In chapter 36, verse 2, I want you to look and see where this event is taking place. Someone tell me. 36, verse 2. They came from Lachish. Mm-hmm. Good. So leading to the field where cloths were washed. This is the same place where Isaiah asked Ahaz to ask for a sign from the Lord. Okay. So back in chapter 7, and you can write these references right next to each other. Chapter 7, it says in verse 3, now I'll read them in the ESV, okay, because I want you to hear the similarities. Chapter 7, verse 3, and the Lord said to Isaiah, go out to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub, your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. Chapter 36, verse 2, and the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. He stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. Okay. These stories are meant to directly parallel each other. Ahaz failed. He leaned on the nations. He turned to Assyria. Hezekiah does not. In the same place, in the same moment of decision, when they are both given the chance, we see one who relies upon the Lord and one who falters and trusts in man. Okay? So those locations are meant to be paralleled with one another because it's the exact same scenario happening. But we get this story at the end of this section in chapters 38 and 39. Hezekiah recovers from this sickness. And when he recovers from this sickness, he's promised 15 more years of life. And he has this psalm that he sings, or this announcement of his recovery. And we see that he's presented kind of like King David in these passages and in his life. He restores the temple, he celebrates the Passover, he trusts in the Lord, and he restores the law in the land. He really seems like quite an awesome guy. But then in this chapter 39, as he is healed after this near-death experience, we see that there's still pride in his heart. And Hezekiah invites the Babylonians into his kingdom. Okay. Now, probably what had happened is this story is taking place sometime around 705 BC, because Merodach Baladan in 39:1 sends representatives from Babylon. And Merodach Baladan's rebellion was thrown down in 704 BC. Okay? So this is before chapter 36 and 37. How do we know that as well? Is because Hezekiah's palace is full of wealth. And when the Assyrians left, Hezekiah paid a very heavy tribute. He gave them tons of wealth. And so there would not have been the wealth still in the kingdom for him to be able to give and show to the Babylonians. So he probably is at that time, he gets healed, and Merodach Baladan says, okay, man, if this guy was about to die, and now he is restored to life, maybe he'll join me in rebellion. And probably Hezekiah joins Merodach Baladan in rebellion against Assyria, and when he tears down all of the altars of the Assyrians in his land, the Assyrians take that as a sign of rebellion, and after they squash the rebellion in Babylon, then Sennacherib marches over to the land of Judah, where he's going to also squash the rebellion in Judah. And that's where the events of chapter 36 and 37 take place. But with these events, what we see with Hezekiah is that he was left alone to be tested. Okay? Would somebody read 2 Chronicles 32, 31? Actually, before that, let's read 2 Chronicles 32, 24 through 26. It's a few verses earlier.
About the time his dad became deputy, he prayed to the Lord to move him and give him a miracle. But Hezekiah did not respond appropriately to the kindness shown him, and he became proud. So the Lord's anger came against him and against Judah and Jerusalem. Then Hezekiah humbled himself and repented of his crime, as did the people of Jerusalem. So the Lord's anger did not fall on them for Hezekiah's lifetime.
So that judgment of God because of Hezekiah's pride is probably his pride that he's rebelling against Assyria, and then the pride, the judgment comes in that form of pride as Sennacherib's attack upon Jerusalem. So then would you also read 32, 31?
However, when ambassadors arrived from Babylon to ask about the remarkable events that had taken place in the land, God withdrew from Hezekiah in order to test him and to see his belief.
So what's God doing? He's withdrawing from Hezekiah to test him, to see what was really in his heart. Okay? This is, like I think I mentioned yesterday to you guys, right? God tests us. You see God testing people oftentimes in the Scriptures. And the purpose of those tests is to reveal what is in the heart of the individual. We see this so often. And so Hezekiah is being tested in this way to see what will he do. Now, with tests as well, you guys, we just got to be ready, because we never know when those tests will come. How can we be ready for the tests of God? Right here. This book. This book is your study guide. Okay. God's not going to tell you what's on the test. He's not going to tell you when the test is going to come. But he does give you everything that's going to be on the test and how to respond to it. Okay. I'm not going to tell you which one it's going to be, but it's there. Okay, so Hezekiah does not pass this test. And when he does not pass this test, Isaiah comes and he says, because you have invited them into your palace, God says that this place will be handed over to the Babylonians. And Hezekiah responds with probably the most prideful statement that you can ever imagine. Well, but long as it doesn't happen while I'm alive. and it's okay. And we see that pride in his heart. That is probably the pride that God was judging when he sent the Assyrians up against the city. He said, okay, the Babylonians are going to come after you're dead, but I'm going to send the Assyrians right now. Right? And that is the place where we see Hezekiah most humbled before the Lord and brought into his temple to cry out before God with that letter from the Assyrians. And from this point on, what we see is that while these stories are not in chronological order, we're going to see a thematic shift towards the rest of the book. And the rest of the book is going to anticipate Judah's deportation to Babylon. Okay? And that will be the assumption for the rest of the book, that the people are coming back from Babylon, or they're coming back from the land of the east to Judah and to Jerusalem. And so this moment of Hezekiah acts as the hinge point for the rest of the book. That his actions with the Babylonians will lead to the exile, but that exile is not the end of Judah. And so, chapters 48 through 66, we want to think about the exile of Judah really quick. Now, I know you guys have looked at the exile last week in the Kings, and you will look at it a ton next week. It's pretty much the major theme of next week's prophets, is the exile. And with that, then, what were they thinking? So we can engage with this portion of the book well. What was their perspective? Well, Lamentations chapter 1 gives us a good perspective of those who have been taken out. And so it's helpful to put next to maybe Isaiah chapter 40, Lamentations chapter 1, because that kind of gives the perspective of the exiles. And the perspectives of the exiles is that we see that they are lonely, they're taken away as slaves. We know that they feel no comfort. Every security net has been ripped out from under them. Their cities destroyed, their families are killed, the temple is decimated, and their land is burned. Everything that they have known has been stripped away from them, and they're being taken away to a foreign land where they don't have a house, they don't speak the language, and they don't have money. To serve as slaves to a foreign people who do not respect them. The friends that they had before are now enemies. All the nations that they thought were friends are enemies. They have no place for rest. All of their gates and their cities are desolate. And this is the feeling of the people after the exile. There is no one to comfort them. But Isaiah chapter 40 opens with some very important words. Chapter 40, verse 1. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Right, the opening words of Isaiah chapter 40. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. And so God is speaking these words of comfort to the people in exile who have been taken away. Then Isaiah speaks them preemptively. And this comfort idea will come up 13 times in these chapters. So it is a pretty consistently repeated idea. Now, some of the questions of the exiles that I think are helpful to understand this portion is asking, why are we here? For those who've been brought into exile and those who have disregarded the prophets for the decades leading up to the exile, why have we been brought into exile now? Are we here because God was not powerful enough to save us? God seemed to be powerful enough in the time of Hezekiah when he protected them from the Assyrians. Why was God not powerful enough against Babylon? Is Marduk more powerful than Yahweh? Will Jerusalem ever recover? Or is that the end of the city of God? Is God able to save us? Or does he even have any power anymore? And what we will see is then laid out in these passages that God is the one who will bring redemption. He is powerful enough to bring them back, and there is no other gods like him. And so the question that will come up is this one: who is like Yahweh? There is none like him. And so this redemption is promised, and this is one of the earliest places that this idea of God as a redeemer comes up. So what is this? What is redemption? Well, we can think of this idea of redemption as people who did not have any way of taking care of themselves. They're in debt. They've lost it all. They had bad crops. They had to sell themselves into slavery. And God is coming along to saying, I will rescue you. That's what a redeemer is. A redeemer is a savior, someone who rescues somebody out of a terrible situation, out of utter hopelessness. And God will come as that redeemer. But before that time, there is a trial that is basically set up between God and Judah. And in this trial, what we see is that God is confronting the idea that exile is not divine neglect, but it is judgment for Israel's sin. So it was not that God neglected them and forgot about them and just let them be taken away by the Babylonians. It's that their sin has led them to this point. And God is very clear to affirm that. The next point is that for Judah's sake, Persia will be raised up to conquer Babylon so that they could come home and fulfill the words of Isaiah. And so really the correct conclusion over their situation should be that God is the true king of history and not the gods of the nations. And the people should rejoice in God and in the nation that God is bringing to deliver them, Persia. And to recognize the servant for who he is. But what we see throughout these passages and through Isaiah's confrontation is that Israel is just as hard-hearted now as they were at the time of Isaiah, when he was speaking to them in Hezekiah's time. And Judah will be redeemed so they might bless the nations. And that is the primary goal. So with chapter 40, we get this strong transition in the book, and we seem to have a changed commission for Isaiah. Okay, and Isaiah is going to be that one who seems to be speaking a lot in the second half of the book, and seems to be almost putting himself in the first person, like Veronica noticed the other day with the servant passage. And if you remember back to chapter 6, God had said, you will speak these words until these things happen. Okay, so this new ministry is kind of seen as, okay, anticipating the destruction of Babylon. Now Isaiah is stepping into a new type of ministry. And this ministry is going to be one with a message of comfort. It is going to be one where there is salvation. Okay, and that will be a major theme in the second half of this book, the last 27 chapters. And that should stick out to us because that's what Isaiah's name means. Yahweh is salvation. Okay. So he is now preaching on that message of salvation for the people. And a lot of the themes will carry over from the previous portion of the book. For example, God's judgment over idolatry, his exaltation and power. But we see a new one that will begin to be highlighted, and we will have these phrases come up, or these songs come up called servant songs, and we'll look at those tomorrow morning and read some of those together. But for the time being, right, Isaiah's ministry has changed. It's going to be primarily about salvation. And one of the first things that he says after he is called to give this ministry of comfort, speaking tenderly to Jerusalem, telling her warfare has ended, your iniquity's been pardoned, is this third verse, which is repeated multiple times in the Gospels, of course, and should be very familiar to us. John the Baptist, right? A voice cries, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Okay? In the context of Isaiah, what would this speak to the people? In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Okay, where does that imply God is? In the desert, right? He's traveling through the desert. Okay, where is he traveling from? Where is he traveling to? Where is his rightful throne? Jerusalem. Good. So, if he's in the desert presently and he's traveling towards Jerusalem, where his rightful throne is, then where does that imply that he is presently? Not Jerusalem. Okay? He is in exile with his people. Okay? The pictures that God shows of himself from henceforth is that he is not abandoning his people. He goes into exile with his people. But even when he judges them, he's with them. It's crazy how good God is. That even these people who have been so ridiculously wicked, so disobedient, and yet God still goes with them into exile is insane. You'll see this in Ezekiel. Ezekiel is by the river Kebar, weeping. It's like his birthday, and God shows up in Babylon. It's like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be back in Jerusalem. Like, you're not supposed to be here. You know? This perspective shift for the people, God is with them. And even though he took them into exile, he was there the whole time. Gosh, how much of a comfort is that, you guys? I mean, for us, to know that in our most devastating moments in life, that God will be there in the midst of us. He'll be with us. He promises not to leave us. Right? Such an encouragement. And so with this announcement, right, to get ready the way for the king, the people, it is the implication that people are being brought out of exile. This is an announcement of freedom. Because if God is returning to Jerusalem, he's not coming by himself. Okay? So when it announces, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, this is God going before them. Right? Make ready his path to come back to Jerusalem, to enter back into his heavenly, or into his rightful throne room. Now, this message always is for Isaiah an announcement of salvation. Right? So this announces the salvation of the Lord for Israel to be brought out of exile and to experience the proper salvation of God. So then, as the Jews had viewed this passage and the passages following this as one of ultimate salvation for them, how much more meaning does it have now that they put it in the lips of John the Baptist? That when he is speaking this message, this is the message he's speaking of. Your king is coming to sit on the rightful throne and to bring his people out of exile, to bring them away from spiritual Babylon, so they might take their rightful place in the New Jerusalem. This message is not just some funny message that John the Baptist is saying from Isaiah. This is taking all of chapters 40 through 66 and putting it into his ministry and saying, Jesus is coming. This is what he's doing. And so 40 through 66, those messages of the supremacy, the greatness of God, the servant who Jesus is, all of that is being put into the words of John the Baptist in his statement to simply say, prepare the way of the Lord. This king is coming. And for us, you guys, he has made a way for us to leave spiritual exile to come into his presence. To not have to suffer under the taskmaster or the slave master of sin, but to step into freedom in his kingdom. He has made a way. And so God is coming out of exile with his people. And he's the one who will be leading the way. The next portion, 41 through 47, which is quite a long section, a few chapters here, there are two primary confrontations that will come up. One of them will be that idols are being judged. And this is prevalent for the next number of chapters. And the next one is God's foreknowledge. And this is another confrontation against idols in this portion, is that God knows what is going to happen. And anybody who would say that Isaiah writes much later and that he writes after the fact of the Babylonian exile or much later after this ministry, pre-exile, I think that it discounts a lot of what is said in these passages because these passages highlight the fact that God knows what's going to happen. And if you put it later on, then it disqualifies that idea. So God knows what will happen, i.e., naming of Cyrus. Okay? A lot of people will suggest that that simple name alone will prove that these passages are written much later, because there's no way that Isaiah would have known Cyrus, and there's no reason for him to have known about Cyrus. So that's one thing that people will use, but it discounts this idea of God having seen and known, right? And so, for example, 41 verse 4, where he says he knows the latter things and he knows knows the first from the last. Okay, so this is all about God's omniscience and his foreknowledge. So we see there's a variety of types of evidence that God is going to give in this portion. The first one that we're going to see, and we're going to come back to these later, will be the servant. Okay? We see this example of a servant who will come. We see Yahweh as the Redeemer. Okay? And as he is that Redeemer, right, he's the people bringing them out of exile, out of slavery. And as he refers to himself as a Redeemer, this is the first time for him to refer to him that way. And so it is a restorer. The thing about a Redeemer is they do not have an obligation to redeem. A Redeemer is one who chooses to redeem. Out of the goodness of their heart and the willingness and generosity of their heart, they choose to bring redemption to somebody else. For example, like Boaz, who redeems Ruth. He doesn't have to do it. It is not his obligation, although it is a responsibility. So he chooses to. So when God says, I will redeem Israel, that should be quite an encouraging thing. 43:1, fear not, for I have redeemed you. Right? And to know that God, in his goodness, chooses to redeem his people, including us, should encourage us a lot. Right? God's choice of us. And what redemption looks like then is being brought into the family of God. Yeah. And God treating his people like sons and daughters, right? Rightful family. Which I think brings an important understanding for us, and that is to understand, being God's child sets us apart in his family. God wants everybody to be part of his family. And that's part of the message of Isaiah 40-66 is the nations coming to him and God desiring all people for him. And I think we have to be careful in our language in evangelism because sometimes we will tell people that they are God's children. But not everybody is God's child. Only those who have been adopted into the family of God are his children. Everybody else is an orphan. Anybody who is not in the family of God is an orphan. They might have been made in God's image, but that doesn't make them his child. So we often tell people in evangelism, no, you're God's son or you're God's daughter and he loves you so much. No, it's not true. Not until they've given their life to Christ are they his son or his daughter. He wants them to become his son or his daughter. And that's what makes it so much more important and profound is the fact that God has desired people and he's chosen them. And that's this redemption idea. God chose to redeem people. It was his choice of individuals, showing that they are valuable. Right? And that's much more of a profound message. To understand that God wants somebody. He has chosen them and he's redeemed them. He has made an opportunity for them to come into his family. When you have a child, you're stuck with them. Mm-hmm. When you adopt a child, you choose them. Okay? And that is what God has done. Right? He has chosen people. And he's invited them. He's given an opportunity for them to become part of his family. And that's what that picture of redemption, the picture of being brought in as part of his family and why it is so profound. So the picture of God's redemption is that of something that is quite expensive or quite costly. Chapter 43, verse 3, it says, "For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior." Okay, so we get a ton of ideas here, right? Yahweh, your God, Holy One of Israel, Savior. It's these four ways of just referring to God that Isaiah has been talking about all along. He says, I give Egypt as your ransom, Cush and Seba as in exchange for you. Because you are precious in my eyes and honored, and I love you. And fear not, I'm with you. I will bring your offspring from the east, and from the west I will gather you. when Israel was really not much to write home about, quite small place, in chapter 7 of Deuteronomy, it says they were the least of all of the nations. And for God to say that he has chosen them above anybody else, it really puts perspective on what is valuable and who is valuable. And we have this kind of idea that, that the people up front, the leaders, are the most important people as far as the most valuable or the most significant. But the people that Jesus says, let come to me, are not the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they're the children. The people that are least expected. People that are the lowest in everybody else's eyes. So low that the disciples are like, man, no, take the children to the back. Move them away. Let the serious people come to Jesus. Right? God has looked upon everybody's lowly estate and has given value to everybody in that way. And it cannot be lost on us. We cannot take advantage of that idea because the rest of the world does not think that way. Worldly perspective does not think that way. It is contrary to the way that God thinks. All you have to do is look at the number of abortions to know the world really doesn't care that much about children. And so for God to place value upon people this way, when they're the least, they're the most vulnerable, they're the outcasts, and to say that those people are the ones that he's chosen, should show how countercultural, how holy and set apart God is. He's so different. And we cannot take that for granted. Even though we read about it every day, we hear about it all the time, it is not the way the world thinks. Mm-hmm. So, with that, I think it's a good place to end. We'll pick up tomorrow and we'll finish out Isaiah and we'll do Joel and Nahum, and that'll be the end of our week. So, let me pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word, God, and for how good you are. Lord, we are just so humbled before you when we think of your choice to redeem us. God, that you would choose us even though we are nobodies. And Lord, let us have your perspective, God, that we would not let the worldly perspective dominate our eyes, Lord, but that we would be ready to be formed and reformed by your word. God, to be shaped by you, Jesus, so that we might reflect you to the world. Lord, help us to see you more clearly, God, so that we might know you and share who you are. To help others understand you, God, to let them know that you've invited them also. Lord, would you help us to see you more clearly through your scriptures? In Jesus' name, amen.